They never called Caleb a sin, but they treated him like one. In the quiet town of Willow Ridge, Missouri, where sermons echoed louder than lullabies and tradition meant everything, Caleb was the firstborn of a deeply religious family, but he was never their favorite. That title belonged to his younger brother Micah, the so-called miracle child, born after years of his mother's desperate prayers. From the moment Micah came into the world, Caleb began to disappear. While Micah was praised for every word he spoke and every drawing he scribbled, Caleb was told to tone it down, to be still, to be strong, and above all, to be silent. The love in their household came with fine print. Be obedient, be righteous, be like your brother. Caleb wasn't. He was quiet, sensitive, curious. He liked to crochet, read stories, hum soft melodies under his breath. All the things that made him feel alive seemed to make his mother uneasy. She'd purse her lips and quote scripture. God made boys to be warriors, not weavers. His father, a stiff and silent man, never disagreed. And in that silence, Caleb learned something more powerful than words: shame. While Micah got birthday parties, trips to the lake, and new gadgets for Christmas, Caleb's world revolved around secondhand books and rules. He wasn't allowed to join the marching band because it clashed with spiritual values. He wasn't allowed to go to prom or dances or even his senior trip. His mother told the school he'd be staying behind for faith reasons. No one asked him if that was true, but something shifted the day an old church member lent him a worn-down saxophone. It was scratched, heavy, and barely held together. But when Caleb touched the keys, he found his voice. He hid in the garage and played for hours. Music was the one thing his mother couldn't quote scripture against fast enough. It became his sanctuary, a secret rhythm where he didn't have to apologize for existing. Only Aunt Miriam noticed. She was the quiet rebel of the family, the one who slipped him birthday cards, let him help in the kitchen, and once said, "You don't have to earn a place at this table." She saw Caleb, the boy too soft for his father's expectations, too strange for his mother's theology, but even her protection couldn't keep out the cold forever. By 16, Caleb had already learned how to disappear without leaving the room. He knew how to tuck his voice behind obedience, how to hide his heart in plain sight. He wasn't just unloved, he was unwelcomed in his own skin. And in a house where blessings were given out like rewards, he was the boy who never earned one. If you've ever wondered what happens to the child who grows up feeling invisible, stay with this story, because what Caleb does next will change everything. Caleb had always been careful not to speak too much, not to move too freely, not to feel too deeply. Every morning in that narrow kitchen with the faded wallpaper and fridge magnets quoting scripture, he measured his words like landmines. His mother's moods were unpredictable. She could sing hymns while flipping pancakes one moment, then hiss judgment the next if she caught him watching a boy band music video or letting his wrist go limp while reaching for a glass. That day started like any other. A rushed breakfast before school, dishes left in the sink in his hurry to make the bus, Micah still half asleep and laughing about some inside joke from youth group the night before. Caleb barely spoke, just grabbed his bag, adjusted the strap of his second-hand coat, and left. The school day passed in its usual haze. Awkward silences, a quiet lunch in the band room with borrowed headphones, a failed attempt at small talk and chemistry. But the moment he started back into the house, something felt wrong. The air was too still, like the house had been holding its breath. And then came the sound, the sharp slap of wood against tile, his mother's voice rising like a siren. "You think this house is a hotel?" she screamed from the kitchen. "You think you can just walk in and out like you pay the bills?" Caleb didn't even have time to drop his bag. She was already charging toward him, a wooden broom clenched in both hands, eyes wild not with hurt, but fury. He barely managed to raise his arms when the broom struck. Once, twice, then again. The third time, the handle snapped in half. She didn't stop. The jagged wooden end cut into his forearm, the bruises blooming like violets under his skin, neck stinging with welts. He cried out not just from pain, but from something deeper, something that had been stuck in his throat for 16 years. He ran to the hallway phone, dialed without thinking. "Domestic abuse line. What's your emergency?" And for the first time in his life, Caleb said it out loud. "My mom is hurting me." He remembered everything after that like it happened underwater. The police sirens, the knock on the door, his mother shouting at the officers, quoting scripture about discipline and rebellious children, the neighbors peeking out from their porches, then the handcuffs. The moment they clicked around her wrists, something else snapped, but not in Caleb. It snapped in the eyes of everyone else, because it wasn't just a Tuesday. It was his Aunt Ruth's birthday, and the whole family had planned to meet at their house before heading to the restaurant. They arrived just in time to see his mother being led outside, flanked by 2 officers, her blouse stained with the flour she'd been cooking with. The looks they gave him weren't concern, they were disgust. "What did you do?" his Uncle Travis barked. "You got your mother arrested over a couple of dishes?" "Ungrateful little brat," Aunt Ruth hissed, adjusting her pearl earrings. "I knew something was off with you." "Always the dramatic one," someone muttered. "Always had to make it about you." No one asked to see the bruises. No one asked why Caleb was trembling. No one cared that he had just protected himself for the first time in his life. They cursed him, one by one, until the front yard was full of whispers, and Caleb was no longer a grandson, a nephew, a cousin, but a traitor. His father, who had moved out years earlier but still kept sporadic contact, was the only one who came to get him. He didn't say much, just let Caleb sit in the passenger seat, sobbing into the sleeve of his coat, while they drove through there. That night, they got fast food and ate in the car. It was the first warm meal Caleb had tasted without tension in years. But it didn't last. His mother was released the next day. She didn't speak to him again. Not a word. She told the church Caleb was confused and had a spirit of rebellion. The house was no longer his home. He bounced between relatives until no one would take him. Even Aunt Miriam, his only haven, was pressured to distance herself for the good of the family. She pushed back where she could, sent him birthday cards, paid for a few weeks of summer camp. But even she couldn't undo the weight of the label his mother had carved onto his skin. Troublemaker. When Caleb turned 18, the church leaders came to collect the saxophone. "It belongs to the congregation," they said. He handed it over without protest. What they didn't tell him was that the saxophone never went back to church. It ended up in Uncle Travis's garage, forgotten, collecting dust, hidden like a shame they couldn't name. Caleb would never play it again. Not in that town, not with those hands. But in the quiet corners of his grief, he remembered the sound it made. And that sound would carry him further than anyone in that house ever believed he could go. Caleb left home with nothing but a duffel bag, a worn jacket, and the lingering scent of his mother's perfume clinging to bruises that hadn't yet faded. He had no instrument, no college savings, and no real place to go. Only a heart full of music and a desperate need to prove that he was more than what they said he was. More than a disappointment, more than a sinful son, more than a shadow. For a while, he slept on the couches of classmates and old church kids who hadn't yet been told to cut ties. He worked part-time at a gas station, took night classes at the community college, and saved every cent he could. His only companion was a busted student-grade flute he bought at a garage sale for $15. The pads were worn, and it leaked air through the cracks. But he played it anyway, every night. In parking lots, in basements, in stairwells, wherever the acoustics could echo back a little warmth. He learned to speak through that flute the way he had once spoken through his saxophone. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about survival. When he auditioned for the State University's music program, he was the only applicant without a professional instrument. The panel stared as he stepped onto the stage with the beat-up case. One professor even smirked. But when Caleb played, the room shifted. He closed his eyes and poured into the melody every aching second of silence he'd endured. Every door slammed in his face. Every missed birthday and swallowed sob. The flute wept. And when the last note faded, there was a silence that didn't feel cold. It felt reverent. He got in. Not just accepted, awarded a scholarship. A full ride. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, crumpled in the mailbox of the diner where he worked double shifts. He read it 3 times before he believed it was real. At 18, he moved into a dorm with 2 strangers who liked beer, football, and had never met someone who'd been disowned for playing music. They didn't understand him, but they left him alone. And that, to Caleb, was kindness. College was hard. He worked through holidays, picked up extra credits, and taught beginner flute to local kids for extra cash. He'd spend hours in practice rooms with cracked ceilings, mastering pieces no one thought he'd ever be allowed to perform. And for the first time, he let himself feel something close to pride. During his second year, a visiting artist, a black queer bandleader from New York, watched him rehearse and said, "You don't play like someone who learned to impress. You play like someone who had to." That man became his mentor, his lifeline. The first adult to look him in the eye and say, "You're not broken. You're built different." That's power. Caleb cried after that conversation, not because of the words, but because no one in his entire life had ever used the word power about him unless it was in a prayer to remove it. Under that mentor's guidance, Caleb learned how to arrange, conduct, and eventually perform with real bands. He toured with them across the country after graduation. Atlanta, Chicago, Seattle, small colleges and festivals that gave him their stages when his hometown wouldn't give him a seat at the table. He came out publicly at 24 during a performance in Philadelphia, wearing a rainbow pin on his blazer, while introducing his new composition titled Inheritance. The piece was a haunting, rising sequence that began with dissonance and ended in harmony, not because the world had changed, but because he had changed in it. That night, a teenage boy in the front row cried during the solo. After the show, the boy waited in the hallway just to say, "That sounded like how I feel every day. Thank you for saying it out loud." Caleb didn't know what to say, so he just hugged him. In that moment, he realized this was family, not the blood that left you bleeding, but the people who handed you a bandage without asking why you were hurt. Over the years, Caleb built a life of quiet purpose. He taught at a community college, mentored young queer musicians, and kept his own apartment where no one called him names for having pink dish towels or jazz vinyls. He didn't go back home, not once. Not even when Aunt Miriam passed away, though he cried for 3 days. The last card she sent him 6 months before her death said, "You were always the one worth watching." He framed it, hung it above his desk. His mother never called. His brother Micah sent a few generic Facebook messages, "Merry Christmas" or "Hope you're well," but nothing real. Caleb didn't answer. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner. No false hope. But even so, every time he heard the breathy growl of a saxophone in a jazz caf or saw one in a pawn shop window, something inside him ached. That sound still belonged to him, but the instrument that first taught him to speak had been stolen. Not just taken, withheld, erased, forgotten in a garage like he had been forgotten in the family photo albums. He never expected it back. Until one rainy Thursday afternoon, 15 years after the police took his mother away, Caleb's phone buzzed with a message that stopped his heart cold. It was from Micah. "Hey, long time. Just found something you might want. Call me?" The message from Micah sat unread for hours. Caleb stared at it like it might bite. He hadn't spoken to his brother in over a decade, not since that awkward exchange at Aunt Miriam's funeral, when Micah mumbled something about time healing wounds, and Caleb responded with a hollow smile that said, "Not this one." But something about the wording, "just found something you might want," dug into him. He didn't reply that day or the next. But on the third night, while sipping lukewarm tea in his small apartment and listening to the rain whisper against the windows, Caleb called. Micah answered on the second ring. "Hey," his voice cracked slightly, like he hadn't expected Caleb to follow through. I found your saxophone, the one from church." Caleb went still. "That was taken back." "Yeah, well, turns out it never made it back to the church. Uncle Travis kept it in his garage all these years. Said it was too nice to give to just anyone." Caleb's jaw tightened. He remembered that saxophone better than he remembered most people. The brass worn smooth by hours of practice. The bent key from the time he dropped it during a thunderstorm. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a part of him that had been amputated when he was cast out. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Because," Micah hesitated, "we thought you might want it back." "We?" "The family." Caleb exhaled slowly, and there it was, the real conversation, hiding just behind the surface like mold behind paint. "The family doesn't speak to me," Caleb said. They haven't in 20 years. I know. Look, I'm not saying it was right, but things are different now. Different how? A pause, then Micah said the word like it burned his tongue. Mom's sick. Dad's bills are piling up. I'm covering what I can, but it's been rough. And, well, people thought maybe if you were in a place to help. Caleb almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. All these years, and the only thing that made them say his name again was need. Not love, not guilt, need. So this is about money, he said flatly. No, Micah said too quickly. I mean, not only. We just thought maybe this could be a chance to reconnect. Caleb imagined the kitchen where his mother once beat him with a broken broom handle. The church that prayed for his deliverance. The birthdays missed, the years erased, reconnect. What a soft word for something so sharp. You're giving me back something that was mine to begin with, he said. That's not generosity, that's return. I'm not trying to offend you, Micah said, defensive now. You haven't changed much, Caleb murmured, still expecting me to play nice so the story feels better. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Micah cleared his throat. I'll leave the sax at the front desk of the hotel near the highway. You don't have to see anyone if you don't want to. Caleb didn't respond. He just hung up. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He sat still for a long time, letting the weight of it settle. Not just the insult, but the realization that even now, even after all this time, they still didn't see him as family. Only as a resource. Something useful again, like that saxophone. When he finally picked it up, 3 days later, in a plastic case wrapped in an old church bulletin, he opened the lid slowly, half expecting it to be rusted or broken. But it was clean, polished even, almost like they'd been taking care of it not out of respect, but out of anticipation. Caleb ran his fingers along the keys. It was heavier than he remembered. Or maybe he was just older, wiser. He didn't play it right away. Instead, he brought it home, set it gently on the piano bench, and stared at it for hours. He didn't sleep that night, or the next. On the third night, he took it to the local community college where he taught. The recital hall was empty. Just him and the ghost of a boy who once dreamed of playing without fear. He raised the instrument to his lips, inhaled, and played. It wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. The first note cracked, the second trembled. But by the third, the sound bloomed. Raw, honest, unapologetic. Caleb poured everything into that session. His bruises, his longing, his years of silence, his love that was never allowed to speak its name. And when it was over, he held the saxophone to his chest like a relic, knowing it was finally back where it belonged. Not because of them, but in spite of them. He never called Micah back. He didn't need to. He knew why the saxophone had suddenly reappeared. Not because anyone missed him, but because the family needed someone with a stable income and a heart soft enough to feel guilt. But they were wrong. Caleb wasn't soft anymore. He was steel-wrapped in brass, tuned by grief and tempered by grace. They had taken his childhood, but they wouldn't take his peace. Weeks passed. Caleb didn't hear from Micah again, and he preferred it that way. The saxophone now sat in a glass case in his classroom, not as a symbol of nostalgia, but as proof that what was once taken could be reclaimed. He continued teaching, continued living. The silence from his family no longer stung. It was expected, and strangely, it brought peace. Until one afternoon, a letter arrived. Not a text, not an email. A handwritten letter in an envelope with smudged ink and the unmistakable looping cursive of Aunt Miriam. Except it was dated 3 years ago. One of Miriam's grandkids had found it while cleaning out old boxes and decided on a whim to send it. Caleb's hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. Caleb, it read, if you're reading this, I've already gone. I tried to hold that family together, baby. I really did. But I need you to know something. I never once doubted who you were. Not when you played music at dinner. Not when I saw the way you looked at boys. Not even when they called you names behind your back. I knew you were something this family didn't know how to hold. But that's not your fault. That's their smallness, not your wrongness. I asked them to return the saxophone to you one day. I told them it wasn't theirs. I told them you'd come back when it was time. But maybe, just maybe, you never needed to. Play for yourself, baby. Just once. And then walk free. Caleb wiped his eyes slowly. She had known. All along, she had known they would one day try to rewrite the story, try to buy redemption with borrowed forgiveness. But she had also known something else. Something they never could. That he had already made peace. The following Friday, Caleb walked into the campus auditorium, saxophone in hand. No stage lights, no announcements, just a handful of students staying after class, chatting quietly. He stood at the edge of the platform and played. No speeches, no apologies, just one final song. It wasn't flashy, it didn't end in applause, but it was honest, filled with years of words unsaid, holidays missed, and the quiet resilience of someone who had loved himself back to life. When he finished, one of his students, a shy, queer kid who always sat in the back, whispered down, "That was beautiful." Caleb smiled. It's the sound of letting go. He walked off the stage, not toward the past, but into something finally his, a life no longer spent proving his worth, but simply living it. Have you ever forgiven someone, not for them, but for your own peace? If Caleb's story touched something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, truth, and reclaiming your voice, even when no one else wants to hear it.